welcome to another episode here of Cressy's Ontario Landlord series, where we're talking to one of our most popular guests, our most knowledgeable guest, one of our favorite guests, Rob Di Lisi from Stonegate Legal Services. How you doing today?
Very good, Kevin. It's always good to be back, and thank you for having me on.
Yeah, today we're gonna get into one of Rob's specialties. Obviously, when we're dealing with landlord and tenant issues, this one is going to be about the Ontario Standard Lease. There's always a lot of questions about this. There's also several mistakes that can get made through this, so we want to make sure that you guys are understanding the process, what it is, how it breaks down. What you can enforce, what you can agree to, is always something that's possible. Doesn't mean though that what you agree to can also be enforced by law. So we have what we know as in the realtor world the agreement to lease form 400, which is what we put together to have a deal come together between tenant and landlord. But to make it official in the province of Ontario as of 2018, the first one came out, is the Ontario Standard Lease that we're going to break down today. We'll pop that one up on screen, but that's the 2018. The next one is that you should be using is the one that was rewritten and an appendix was added in 2021. So that's the form that you want to be using when this is happening moving forward to make sure that your lease is legit, enforceable, and everything. And something that was just told to me offline, we're going to start this show off with really, really quick before we get into Rob, was that if you don't fill out the Ontario Standard Lease within 21 days of the tenant moving in, they can actually get a rebate of 1 month's rent or withhold 1 month's rent, which I did not know. That was news to me. So thought I'd start that off there and make sure that everybody knows that that's something that is out there. And anyways, I did not know that. It's something that sometimes we don't always do right away as agents. We let that lack a day or two, three, whatever. But there is a deadline there, so that does need to get done. Anyways, Rob, let's bring you in here and let's get you to start off with the Ontario Standard Lease.
So, as you said, prior to April 30th, 2018, people used the Form 400 as a lease. The Form 400 is no longer a lease; it's an agreement to lease. In the real estate industry, it's very common that agents still use the Form 400, and then after everything has been executed, they will now do the Ontario Standard Lease. It's very, very important that people understand the reason why the Ontario Standard Lease came into effect is that prior to the Ontario Standard Lease, people had different agreements. Every lease was different. So, what they wanted to do was standardize. It's also important to note that anything that you add to your lease, you can add anything you want. It's just if it goes against the Residential Tenancies Act, which is the legislation, then it will not be enforceable. And those things such would be like for maintenance fees or that the lease is going to come to the end at the end of the term. You can't arbitrarily make that decision. So we're going to go through step by step. You can chime in as I speak, and if you want to ask me questions or things, but I want to go over some important things that people need to know. So, number one is going to be in regards to leases. When you sign a lease, it automatically goes month to month. The term is called security of tenure. And what that means is that the tenants are entitled to occupy the rental unit even after the initial term specified in the rental agreement. In fact, there's only three ways to terminate tenancy. Number one is if a tenant gives you notice, which is an N9, which is a minimum 60 days notice. Number two would be a mutual agreement, which is the N11. And number three would be a court order, meaning that you take them to the board, you get the order, and then you take it to the sheriff, and then they evict. It's important to note that the police have nothing to do with this. When I say a sheriff, I'm not talking about the cowboy sheriff. I'm talking about a court appointed officer. They come and they carry out the order. So if you have questions about that, Kevin, I'm going to go into the little nitty
No,
gritty,
I
but
think
go
that's
ahead.
something that we've talked about before, right? The three ways to get people out and everything. So their security of tenure, it's always going to turn into month to month after the term, right? I just had that conversation with a gentleman yesterday. He was like, "Well, what if we want it back in a year or 2 years? How do we do that? Can we sign an N11 in advance and mutually agree that in 2 years?" And as I see you shaking your head, no, that's the same thing I said to him as well. Can't be done because things can change in that tenant's world, even though they thought that that was going to be a good thing for them in 2 years prior. Once that time comes, as you said, security to tenure, so they don't have to vacate, even though they said they did anyways. Um, so with that lease, we have our tenants' names on there, our names on there as well. But the other people that can occupy a unit would be occupants, right? Um,
Yep,
and
that's right.
I know that that's something that we have that we want to discuss as well, occupants and guarantors within that Ontario Standard Lease. Why don't you hit that?
Yeah, so on page 1, where the tenant's name is, nowhere will you see a section for occupants or guarantors. And the reason being for that is your tenants are the ones that are protected under the Residential Tenancies Act. Occupants or children are not protected under the Residential Tenancies Act. So if you want to add an occupant, which you really don't have to do, what I've seen people do is they'll add the name of their child, but then in brackets they'll put occupant. That's fine. It's just, I don't think it's even necessary. Uh, you need to be aware that whoever's on the lease is your tenant. So if you ever need to do a notice, you only put the names of the tenants, not the names of the occupants, roommates, or guests. Another thing that people ask me about is guarantors. So you got to be careful when you say guarantor, because people think that if I get a guarantor that I'm guaranteed to get paid because I can just go after the guarantor. Well, there's a few things to note. Number one, they don't need to be on the lease. There should be a separate agreement. Usually, guarantors, not always, but usually the guarantor agreement is for 1 year. It's to hopefully get that tenant secured that they're going to be able to pay the rent for 1 year. But here's the thing is that it has nothing to do with the tenancy. What it has to do with is the monetary. So if you are a tenant and you don't pay me rent, I don't go yelling at the guarantor that they're not paying me, even though you can. What I would have to do is wait to get an order. Once I get that order, then I can take it to small claims and go after the guarantor, assuming that the guarantor agreement is still in effect. Because as I said earlier, most guarantor agreements are for the first year. After the first year, the guarantor is usually indemnified, meaning they're released from their obligation to guarantee the contract. Even if you get a small claims verdict against the guarantor, you still need to collect it. That would be through garnishment or through what's it called when you take away their bank account, garnishment or getting it from their bank account. I can't remember what it's called. Either way, even if you do, you can only collect 20% per paycheck. It's important to note. Okay.
So, what about adding that guarantor as the tenant and using the tenants then as occupants, right?
Yeah, so you can do that, and that's really common in student housing. So let's say, for example, you're going to university and your parents are going to be the tenants, and then the kids will be as the occupants. You can do that, but that's no longer a guarantor. That's just a tenancy. That's
No,
all that
just a
is.
way of securing that little bit of a better
Yeah.
profile for someone to be able to make sure they're confident that rent is going to be paid when renting out to
Yes,
somebody
absolutely.
maybe who has poor credit or maybe doesn't support the income properly. But they have somebody that wants to be the guarantor to say, "Hey, I'm going to guarantee that they're going to make sure payments are made." It's better to have them as the tenant and then the people occupying the unit just as occupants.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I agree. But not in all cases will that happen,
No,
right?
no, yeah, they have to agree to it, obviously, and
Yeah.
everything. So again, some of the things that we're going to circle back around, common mistakes that go through the Ontario Standard Lease, or you're mentioning that the address being completely filled out, right? Making sure all that is there and correct. That if it's main floor, it's main floor, not just main. However,
Right. So If it's a basement, make sure you put it's a basement. If it's a basement and there's separate units, make sure it's labeled. So basement unit one, basement unit two. And the reason being for that is if the sheriff ever comes and they need to evict, they're gonna look at the order, and if it just says basement and there's two units down there, there's a chance that they will not evict because it's not clear who they're evicting. So it's very important to outline what the unit is. Very important. And if you don't mind, I'm going to talk just in regards to the biggest mistake that I see on the Ontario Standard Lease from agents and landlords is the utility section, which is section 6, and there's like check marks. And where people make a mistake is that they'll say that the utilities is not included, but then they'll check mark on the Ontario Standard Lease that it is included. So you need to be extremely careful when you're filling this out. And as an agent, you're opening yourself up to liability if you make those mistakes. So make sure you take your time. And we were talking about this off camera. As a listing agent, it is the listing agent that should be doing and filling out with the landlord the Ontario Standard Lease. Do not rely on the buyer agent because the buyer agent can also make mistakes. And if you accept it and that is the lease moving forward, then again, you're opening yourself up to the liability of this stuff not being filled out
Yeah,
properly.
once the lease is signed, the lease is signed. So if it was a mistake, it's not a mistake, right? It's actually there.
Correct.
Another thing that we've talked about many times that a lot of people do is an improper deposit or improper key deposit. A key to a front door I can get made $5, $6, something like that. A fob, at some buildings cost $75, maybe $50. So something like that, they can verify that that's the cost of it. But just moving into a regular house without any fancy mechanism, just has a regular key lock, key deposit has to be.
Yeah, so with houses, it like I did one not too long ago. The cost of the key was $7.50. Now, for a condominium, I know the argument is that there are special keys, there's a fob. The thing is that remember, in accordance to Ontario Regulation 516.6, Section 17.3, you can only charge for the cost of replacement. So sometimes I see people putting 300, 500, $1,000 for a key deposit, and I guess you can say it's fine until the tenant realizes it's not fine, and then they file against the landlord for an illegal deposit. Uh, on that same page, because we didn't talk about this, is tenant's insurance. Many people think that it's mandatory that a tenant gets insurance. And I hate to tell people, it is not mandatory. Nowhere in the Residential Tenancies Act does it say they have to get insurance. It's in their benefit to get tenants insurance because it covers their belongings. If there's a flood, like in Toronto, for sure, there's a lot of high-tech plumbing failing and their units are being flooded, their furniture is being destroyed, where tenants insurance will cover them. In some policies, not all, they will also cover a time period for going to a hotel or Airbnb. And just a note on that, a tenant does not have to get liability insurance. In the province of Ontario, if you have a mortgage on your property, by law, you must have liability insurance. So you don't need to double dip on liability insurance.
One of the things about the tenant's insurance for us, anyways, we always ask them to get it right as they're coming in, so we can do it on transfer of keys. But I know we've talked about this many times, and I think it was even on a previous episode somewhere as well. That if they ever cancel it, there's nothing that we can do, right? Once they choose, but we can ask for proof of insurance on transfer of keys. But after that, we have
Yeah.
no control.
Well, it's good that you have it in writing because if they do cancel it and something goes wrong and there's a flood, at least you can show, well, you said that you were going to have tenant insurance because really there's no prejudice to the landlord whether the tenant has contents insurance or not. So it's really for their benefit, for their belongings. So if they have fancy furniture or fancy TVs and they don't want them to be destroyed, they should get tenants insurance.
Um, the other thing that we were discussing that we wanted to bring up for everybody here today is also guests and visitors to the property. You know, we have a situation right now at a property where somebody has allowed another mother and son to move into the property, and we had no idea that they were there until just recently. Um, they weren't on the lease. There's nothing we can do. But they do live there, right? They supposedly they've been paying rent to the other tenants as well. But
So I will comment on that. Uh, let me give you the best example that I can think of. Let's say my wife and I rent a four-bedroom house from you, Kevin. You're the landlord, and my wife and I and my child are going to be moving in. We move in, but then my parents decide that they want to move in with us. So they want to occupy one bedroom. And my sister's also having a hard time in life. So she wants to move in with us as well. Under the law, the landlord cannot say you cannot have occupants, roommates, or guests. And in the law, nowhere does it say how long a guest can stay. So the question is that what prejudice is the landlord facing by having more people in the property? The only time that it's a problem is if it goes over the bylaw. So on a four-bedroom house, and I'm just throwing numbers around, so you would have to check the municipality. It's not unusual to be able to have 8, even possibly 10 people living in the house. Now that is extreme, but if I have, let's say, 3 extra people living with me with my family, that's a total of 6 people, which is below probably the bylaw, and they're paying me a portion of the rent. Well, as long as they're not paying me more than what I'm paying you, there's no prejudice, number 1. Number 2, if the utilities are in my name, it's not affecting you at all because I pay for the water and electricity. So a lot of landlords get their I haven't used this term, knickers in a knot, I think the term is, like, and they get all upset because there's more people there than should be. And I always tell them, well, what's the problem? The other example is if I rent a one-bedroom condominium and I have a different girl there visiting me every night. Do I need to get the landlord's permission? No, I do not. In fact, if I fall in love with one of these girls and she moves in with me, I do not need the landlord's permission. If the tenant, sorry, if the guest wants to pay me rent, that's not a problem either. What the landlord should think of is they shouldn't be accepting rent from anyone other than their tenant. That is the key. Is you should never accept rent from anyone other than your tenant. And if you do, you need to be extremely careful because what could happen is something called implied tenancy. And they can argue and say, well, I've been paying you rent, you've been accepting rent, therefore I am your tenant. So that is basically about guests, occupants, and visitors.
excellent. Just to touch on that, just with that rent, the tracing of it, how it comes around. Let's say landlord knows guest Sam is paying tenant Frank to be there, but all funds are coming from Frank's bank account. But landlord is aware that Sam is paying some money to Frank. Oh, sorry
I'm
about
sorry,
the
what's the
applied
question, Kevin?
tenancy, right?
It could be. It could be. So the way that it should happen is that if I am the tenant and let's say I have a girlfriend and she wants to pay rent, she should be paying me the rent. I pay the
Right.
landlord.
But if the landlord knows that that's happening, is it implied tenancy at any point just because there's no
No,
trail of it coming directly from the girlfriend?
no, no, because they're not she's not a tenant, right? So if she's paying me as a guest. In fact, if me and my girlfriend break up and I get a new girlfriend and it's the same arrangement, again, the payments are always coming from the tenant, not from the occupant, roommate, or
No,
guest.
just wanted to clarify that for everybody out there.
Yeah, no problem. No problem.
Anything we want to touch on about the OSL? Like again, all the appendix and everything that's at the back end is what people have to abide by and follow. Moving into condominium, there's always condominium rules that tenants have to follow as well. Um, well, I guess we can talk about some clauses that people put in that are there that are great when people agree to them, but aren't enforceable or
Any clauses that you put in that are against the Residential Tenancies Act are void. So if you're asking for a damage deposit, maintenance deposit or a clause that says that the tenant will be responsible for the first $100, $400, whatever it is for the maintenance. You can put it in. It's not enforceable. Um, just a little recap about the OSL. It should be done by the listing agent if you can. If you don't give them a copy within 21 days, they can withhold rent. Other than that, like I could talk about this for another hour. It's just I wanted to just give you the main points of what you need to know about the Ontario Standard
Yeah.
Lease.
Well, maybe we'll come back and we'll get another 20-minute chunk of that hour and we'll share with everybody then. But I guess for today, that wraps this one up. If you have any questions about the Ontario Standard Lease, always reach out to our friends at Stonegate Legal Services. They'll help guide and advise and consult you through the process there. And obviously, we're here to help as well with anything on that real estate side, property management side with your property. So bye for now. Thanks so much, and we'll talk to you soon.
Please remember, while we are professionals, this podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only. The advice shared may not apply to your unique situation. Always seek personalized advice from a qualified professional before making any investment decisions.
Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us this week. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you're finding it informative and useful, make sure to like, subscribe, share with a friend so that we can keep getting the information out there to Ontario landlords. And keep on joining us. We'll see you next time.